Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Harlow. I'm 34 years old. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. And if you had told me 2 years ago that I would someday be sitting here willingly talking about the most painful chapter of my life in front of a camera, I would have laughed at you. I am not a person who shares. I never have been. I was raised by two quietly private people in a small town outside Asheville. And the family motto, if we'd had one, would have been, handle your own things and don't make a show of it. But something happened to me 2 months ago, something that a handful of people who were present have started talking about publicly. And if my story is going to be told, I am going to be the one who tells it. Because the version I keep hearing secondhand is missing all the parts that actually matter. It's missing the 7 years before it, the 6 years of Sunday dinners I didn't choose and couldn't escape, the key that appeared in another woman's hand in my own home. The version of me who used to edit her own laugh in rooms full of people who were supposed to love her. It's missing the year I sat on my kitchen floor and made a decision. The 16-hour days after that. The first contract, the first client call before sunrise. The first night I looked at a bank statement and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride that belonged entirely to me. And it is absolutely missing what happened exactly 5 minutes after my mother-in-law said the cruelest thing anyone has ever said to my face, inside a building I built with my own hands, at an event I hosted, wearing the best dress I have ever owned. So, from the very beginning, because you cannot understand what happened at the end without understanding what was slowly, quietly happening all along. I met Daniel Harlow when I was 23 years old. I was fresh out of a marketing degree at UNC Charlotte, the first person in my family to finish a 4-year university, which felt enormous and terrifying in equal measure. I was working at a small advertising firm downtown, sharing a one-bedroom apartment with two other women, surviving mostly on bad coffee and the specific stubborn optimism that only 23-year-olds with no real failure experience can sustain. Daniel came into the firm for a client consultation meeting. He was 30 at the time, tall, well-dressed, not flashy, but put together in a way that suggested he paid attention to himself without being vain about it. He had this quiet, easy confidence. Not the loud, look-at-me kind, the kind that fills a room by not needing anything from it. He smiled at me when I handed him the meeting agenda, not flirtatiously, just genuinely. Like I had just done something worth noticing. I remember the exact thought I had. He looks kind, not just handsome, kind. That distinction mattered more than I understood at 23. I am going to keep reminding you of it throughout this story, because I think it is the central thing about Daniel that I never stopped being confused by. How someone can look so much like kindness and still let unkindness happen over and over without stopping it. We went for coffee after that first meeting ran long. We talked for 3 hours. He asked about my work, like he actually wanted to know the answer. He made a joke that was genuinely funny. He walked me back to my office building and shook my hand, which I found both formal and completely charming, and asked if he could call me. He called that evening. We dated for 2 years. Those 2 years were wonderful in the uncomplicated way that the beginning of something good always is. Daniel remembered small things, the exact way I took my coffee, the name of my college roommate's cat, the fact that I couldn't sleep after watching anything with jump scares. He called when he said he would. He showed up every single time. He was consistent in the specific way that matters most to a person who grew up in a family where inconsistency was the whole atmosphere. He made me feel safe. I want you to hold that word, safe. I'm going to come back to it several times because I think one of the most important things I have ever learned is the difference between actually being safe and simply feeling safe around someone who has not yet shown you who they become under pressure. He proposed on a Tuesday night in October. No big production. Just the two of us on the porch of the small house we'd started renting together. Chinese takeout on the coffee table getting cold. Daniel on one knee holding a ring he had saved 3 honest months to buy. He started speaking, and I was crying before he finished his second sentence. I said yes instantly, without calculation, without condition, without any of the careful logic I usually applied to every significant decision in my life. What I didn't fully understand, what I chose not to look at too carefully in the warmth of that night, was that saying yes to Daniel also meant saying yes to his mother. And his mother had been watching me since the day I arrived. Her name was Linda Harlow, 57 years old at the time of our engagement, recently retired after a long career in real estate. Impeccably turned out, always dressed like she expected to be photographed, always composed, always articulate. She was the kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately, quietly, assessed everyone in it and filed her conclusions away for later use. She had one central purpose in her life, and that purpose was Daniel. Not in the healthy, loving from a distance way that sounds warm when you describe it. In the consuming, orbit-altering, your entire identity is being his mother way that doesn't leave room for anyone else to matter to him at the same level she does. She made this clear to me at our engagement dinner in the particular indirect way that women like Linda specialize in, the kind of communication that lands as an insult but can be described later as a simple observation. Daniel had arranged a small dinner at his parents' favorite restaurant. His father, Robert, was there, a quiet man who looked at the world from behind kind, slightly tired eyes, and seemed to genuinely enjoy taking up as little space as possible. He shook my hand warmly, and within 5 minutes had told me I had a wonderful laugh, which I liked him enormously for. Linda sat directly across from me. She studied me, not quickly, not subtly, and then said with a polite smile fixed firmly in place, "So, Jessica, Daniel tells me you're in advertising." "Yes," I said. "I love it, actually. I've been with the firm almost 2 years now, and I'm hoping to move into more of a strategic role by." "It's a good hobby," she said. She moved immediately to the breadbasket after that. Hobby. Not career, not profession, not livelihood. Hobby. I sat with that word inside me for a full 3 seconds before I reassembled my smile. Daniel was talking to his father and hadn't caught it. I looked at Robert to see if he had, but he was carefully buttering his bread with the focused attention of a man who had learned that some things were easier not to notice. I told myself, she's nervous. Meeting her son's fiancé for the first time. She didn't mean it the way it landed. That was the very first time I told myself it was nothing. I would tell myself that several hundred more times over the next 6 years. We got married 8 months after the engagement. The ceremony was small and simple, in a garden venue about an hour from Charlotte on a perfect October afternoon. The kind of day where the light slants golden through the trees and everything looks like something you'd want to keep forever. I was happy. Genuinely, completely happy. Standing at the front of that garden next to the man I loved, in the dress I had saved for myself, without any help from anyone, surrounded by the people who had actually shown up for me in my life, I felt certain. That certainty lasted until the reception. Linda found me near the dessert table about an hour in. She had that particular look she had, warm in structure, calculated in execution, and she touched my arm lightly, leaned close, and said, "I just want you to know, before this next chapter begins, I love my son more than anything in this world. I have loved him every day of his entire life, and I always, always will put him first. I hope that you can understand that." She patted my arm once, smiled, and walked away to accept a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. I stood there in my wedding dress, holding my own champagne, watching her go, and I turned the sentence over in my mind, trying to find the version of it that was just a mother expressing love. I couldn't quite find it. What I found instead was the unmistakable shape of a territorial declaration wrapped in the language of devotion. I pushed it down. It was my wedding day. I pushed it down, and I went back to dancing. The first few years of the marriage were genuinely good between Daniel and me, and I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. In our private world, in our home, between the two of us, in the ordinary rhythms of a life being built together. Things were good. We were good. Daniel was attentive and affectionate. We had routines that we both loved: Sunday morning cooking, evening walks around the neighborhood, a standing date night every other Friday. We argued occasionally and resolved things. We made each other laugh. In the private hours of our marriage, we were happy. But Linda was never just in her own home. She called Daniel every single day. Not a quick check-in, real conversations. 30 minutes minimum, often an hour. She called at dinner time, which meant Daniel spent half our meals at the kitchen counter with the phone pressed to his ear. She called on weekend mornings. She called on evenings when we had plans, and the call always, without fail, ran past the time we needed to leave. If Daniel didn't answer immediately, she called again. If she still couldn't reach him, she texted me. "Is Daniel with you? Can you tell him to call me?" Not, "Is everything okay?" Not, "I hope I'm not interrupting." Just, "Where is my son?" As though I were his assistant. Our first anniversary, Daniel and I went to Savannah for 4 days. It was the first real vacation we'd taken alone together. No family, no work obligations, just us in a beautiful city with nowhere we had to be. Day 1 was perfect. Day 2, she called 4 times before noon. Day 3, she texted Daniel that her back was flaring up and she might need help with the groceries, and could he call when he had a moment, and she was fine. She just wanted to hear his voice. Day 4, Daniel was physically present, but completely somewhere else. Distracted, checking his phone, giving me half of his attention, while the other half was already driving back to Charlotte. We left 6 hours early. In the car, I said, "She does this every time we go somewhere." Daniel said, "She just misses me. She doesn't have a lot going on since she retired." I looked at the road ahead and said nothing, and the nothing I said sat between us all the way home. Year 3 is when I first understood that Linda wasn't just present in our marriage. She was actively shaping it. I had been promoted at my firm, a significant promotion, the strategic role I had been angling for since I started, with a real salary increase and a team of 2 reporting to me. I was proud in a way that went all the way down to my bones. I had earned it. I had worked late and taken the difficult clients and stayed solutions-focused in the meetings where it would have been easier to defer. I came home and told Daniel over dinner. He was genuinely happy for me. He opened a good bottle of wine. He toasted me and meant it. 2 days later, Sunday dinner at the Harlow table, a standing weekly obligation I had never formally agreed to, but somehow could not escape. And Linda said, completely casually, while serving herself salad, "Daniel, I was reading about that management position at Creighton's. You should really look into it. I think it would suit you." She didn't look at me. She never had to. What she was saying translated, "Your wife is earning more than you now, and this arrangement embarrasses me, and I need you to fix it." Daniel didn't take the Creighton's job, but something changed in him anyway. A subtle recalibration that I felt before I could name it. He started staying at the office later. He stopped asking about my projects with the same genuine curiosity he used to have. The Sunday cooking sessions, one of my favorite small pieces of our life, started happening every other week, then once a month, then not at all. And Linda started appearing more, not announced, just there. A Tuesday afternoon when I was working from home. A Thursday evening when Daniel was still at the office. Once on a Saturday morning at 9 a.m., when Daniel and I were still asleep. I came out of our bedroom in my pajamas to get water, and she was standing in my kitchen, systematically removing every item from my upper cabinets and replacing them in different locations. She didn't turn around when I came in. "These were organized wrong," she said. "You had the everyday glasses way in the back." It made no sense. I stood there barefoot on my own kitchen floor, in my own home, staring at the back of this woman who had a key I had never consciously given her, and I could not find a single word. Not because I had nothing to say. Because I had so much to say, and I was still in the chapter of my life where I believed that saying it would only make things worse. I need to stop here for a second and ask you something, because this is the part of the story I have turned over in my mind more than any other. At this point, the key, the kitchen reorganization, the Sunday dinners, the daily phone calls that cut into every vacation we tried to take, what would you have done? Would you have confronted her directly, set a hard boundary with Daniel? Or would you have kept the peace like I kept doing, telling yourself it was manageable, telling yourself you were being patient and mature? Drop your answer in the comments, because I think about this all the time. I think there are a lot of us who chose quiet when we should have chosen loud, and I think the reasons we chose it are more complicated than people who weren't in it can understand. I brought it up to Daniel that night, gently, carefully. I told him I loved him and I respected his relationship with his mother, and I needed us to have a real conversation about limits. She's just trying to be helpful, he said. You know how she is. Daniel, she reorganized my kitchen without asking. On a Saturday morning, it's just a kitchen. It's just a kitchen. It's just a phone call. It's just how she is. It's just one Sunday dinner. It's just a comment, Jess. She didn't mean anything by it. Every single erosion wrapped in the word just. And every time I accepted the just, I gave away another small piece of myself that I was never going to get back. I lay awake that night and looked at the ceiling and thought, this is how it starts. The small accepts that become the medium accepts that become the large accepts until you look up one day and realize you are not the person who moved into this house anymore. I thought that. And then I rolled over and went to sleep because I did not yet understand that thinking the true thing and acting on it are entirely different skills, and only one of them can save you. Year 4, Linda began commenting on my appearance, always with the warm smile, always framed as concern. Never, and I mean never, without perfect deniability. You look so tired lately, Jessica. Are you getting enough sleep? Translation, you are aging and I want my son to notice. That color is a bit severe on you, isn't it? I always think warm tones suit women with your complexion better. Translation, I want you to look washed out and uncertain every time you stand next to my son. I was looking at some recipes. Daniel always loved it when I made pot roast on Sundays. I could write them down for you. Translation, you are inadequate in your own home, and I am reminding you. She started excluding me from family decisions in ways that were presented as oversight but never were. Daniel's cousin's wedding, I found out 3 days before we weren't attending because the family had talked it through and decided it would be uncomfortable given an old conflict I had never been told about. Daniel had been part of that conversation for 2 weeks. He had not mentioned it to me once. When I pointed this out calmly, I thought he looked genuinely puzzled. I thought I told you, he said. He hadn't. But the look on his face suggested that he had stopped distinguishing between conversations he had with me and conversations he had with his mother, and I think that might have been the most frightening moment of the whole marriage. The daily calls had become the architecture of his day. He woke up and called her. He left work and called her. He made decisions, actual life decisions, some of them, and I found out about them the way you find out about something that has already been finalized, after the fact, with no room for input. And in her text to him, she no longer used his name. She called him home. Come home this weekend. Your father needs you home. I need you home Sunday. Home was not our house. Home was where Linda lived. And so slowly, I almost couldn't feel it while it was happening, Daniel started navigating toward it. Year 5, I began to disappear. Not physically. I was there. I showed up to the Sunday dinners and the family holidays and the birthday parties where Linda orchestrated the seating, so I was never quite at the center of anything. I showed up and I smiled and I passed the dishes and I said the right things when the right things were expected. But I stopped being myself inside of it. I began editing constantly. What I said, what I wore, how much I laughed and how loudly, the topics I introduced versus the ones I let go. At a work dinner with Daniel's colleagues, people I had never met, I barely spoke for 2 hours because I was running every potential sentence through a filter first. Would this be the thing that gets reported back, taken wrong, used later? Driving home, Daniel said, "You seemed off tonight," and I looked out the passenger window at the dark road and thought, I have been disappearing for 5 years, and this is the first time you have noticed. I said, I was just tired, just tired. I was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I was exhausted in the way that happens when you are performing full-time, when every room you enter requires a costume, when the person you actually are has been living in such a small, quiet corner of your own life that you've nearly forgotten what she looks like. I had friends before this marriage, good ones, but I had let them drift slowly because the energy required to manage Linda's world left so little left over for anything that was purely mine. My closest friend from college, Maya, had called me 6 times over the past year. I had called her back twice, not because I didn't love her, because I didn't know how to explain what was happening to me in a way that wouldn't require me to say out loud, I think I am in trouble and I can't see the exit. Year 6. By year 6, I had left my firm, a restructuring, a pivoting window I missed because I was too depleted to see it coming. I was freelancing, enough clients to survive, not enough momentum to feel like I was going anywhere. I was home more, Linda was around more, the math of that was brutal. There was an afternoon in November. I remember it was gray outside, the specific flat gray of a North Carolina November. No drama to the sky, just flat and colorless. When I walked past the hallway mirror in our house and stopped, I looked at myself for a long moment and I thought, I do not recognize this person. Not in a dramatic way, not a crisis moment, just a quiet, factual, devastating observation. The woman in that mirror was holding herself differently than I used to hold myself. Her shoulders were forward, her expression was guarded even here, alone in the hallway of her own home. She looked like someone waiting to be corrected. I turned away from the mirror and went back to my laptop and kept working. But I did not forget what I saw. The marriage ended on a Wednesday night in January. It was raining, the specific heavy rain that comes in southern winters, not dramatic, just relentless and cold. I had cooked a real dinner, the kind I used to cook when we first moved in, when I still believed that small domestic gestures were a language that 2 people could use to say, I see you here, this matters to me. I set the table, I lit the candles we never used, I poured wine, I waited until 9:30. Daniel came home at 9:30 and 3 minutes. He had been at his parents' house. He told me the way you mentioned the weather. Flat and informational, not apologetic, as though his parents' house and our home occupied the same category of place. I set my fork down. I looked at him across the table, across the candles I had lit and the food I had made and the wine that was now room temperature. And I said, very quietly, I need us to go to counseling. He looked at me. He held the look for long enough that I thought he was going to agree. Then he said, I don't think counseling is going to fix the problem. The silence that followed that sentence was the loudest silence I have ever sat in. I said, then explain what will fix it. He looked at the table. He looked at the wall behind me. He looked back at me, and I watched something move across his face. A settling, a resolving. The specific expression of someone arriving at a decision they made somewhere else, at some other time, in some other conversation that I was not part of. I think, he said, that we want different things. I want you to sit with those 5 words and feel what they do to you, because they are possibly the most devastatingly constructed sentence in the English language for ending something. They are not cruel enough to be called cruel. They are not specific enough to be argued with. They place the ending in the category of incompatibility, something neither person caused, which is a generous frame for the person who decided to leave. I asked him directly, is there someone else? He said, no. He looked at me steadily when he said it. I held his gaze and tried to find the truth in it. 3 weeks later, Daniel moved out. He took his clothes, his books, the coffee maker he had brought into the marriage, and the quiet that had been growing between us for 2 years. He moved into a 2-bedroom apartment 6 miles away. I know because Maya found the address and told me. I did not call him. I did not text him. I sat in the house that suddenly felt enormous for one person, and I understood for the first time that the grief of a marriage ending is not one feeling. It is many feelings arriving in unpredictable order on no particular schedule, with no concern for whether you are at a point in the day where you have capacity for them. 2 weeks after Daniel moved out, Linda called me. Not to check on me, not to express any form of human acknowledgement that this was painful. Not to apologize for a single Sunday dinner or reorganized cabinet or just that was swallowed without protest. She called to tell me that this separation had been enormously difficult for Daniel and to request that I please keep the divorce proceedings clean and quick. For Daniel's sake, she said. She actually said those words, for his sake. I said, I appreciate you calling, Linda. I hung up. I sat down on my kitchen floor, not dramatically, just because my legs stopped cooperating, and I stayed there for 45 minutes with my back against the cabinet door. Then I got up. I washed my face with cold water. I made a cup of tea, and I said something to myself, out loud, in my empty kitchen, because I needed to hear it in the air. This is not the end of your story. Stay with me. I know that was heavy. I know it has been building slowly, and that might be frustrating if you came here just for the good part. But I need you to understand the weight of what I was carrying. Because the reason the ending lands the way it does is because of everything that came before it. The divorce was finalized 11 months later. I got the car, half the joint savings, and my name. Jessica Harlow was the professional identity I had been building for a decade, and I was not about to let Linda have the satisfaction of watching me surrender that too. The month after the papers were signed was the hardest month of my life. I was 32 years old, freshly divorced, living alone in a city where most of my real friendships had drifted during 6 years of a marriage that consumed everything not essential to its own maintenance. I was freelancing, enough to pay the rent, not enough to feel like I was building toward anything. I was tired in the deep way that sleep cannot touch. I remember one Thursday afternoon sitting on my couch with the television on and absolutely not watching it, just staring at the middle distance. And the thought arrived with the clarity of something that has been waiting a very long time to be acknowledged. This is not who I was supposed to be by now. That thought could have taken me in 2 directions. It took the right one. That same week, I called Maya. She had been trying to reach me for months, and I had been deflecting because I didn't know how to explain what had happened to me in a way that made sense. I called her, and I said, I think I need to talk. We met for coffee, and I talked for an hour and 40 minutes, and she did not interrupt me once. By the end of it, she had tears on her face and was visibly furious in the specific way that someone who loves you gets angry about things that were done to you when you were too inside them to see clearly. That fury was the most useful gift anyone has ever given me. And then she said the thing that changed everything. She looked at me across the table and said, You have been doing other people's marketing for 10 years and building other people's brands. When are you going to build your own? I had asked myself versions of that question for years, but I had always answered it with, someday, when things settle down, when I have more bandwidth. When Daniel and I work out this thing with his mother. When? Sitting there post-divorce, post-rock bottom, with nothing left to protect, there was no more when. I went home and opened my laptop. I spent 3 weeks doing something I had not done in years, thinking exclusively about what I knew and what I was good at, and what gap existed in the world that I was uniquely positioned to fill. I had spent 10 years watching mid-sized companies hemorrhage money on agency contracts that delivered unmeasured generic results. I had watched entrepreneurs pay thousands of dollars monthly for marketing strategies that a focused, intentional approach at half the budget could have outperformed. I knew that problem from the inside. I had been frustrated by it since my 2nd year in the industry. I decided to solve it. I built a real business plan. Cash flow projections, client acquisition modeling, pricing structure, 3-year trajectory. I reached out to 3 former clients from my freelance work. people who had told me directly that I was the best contractor they'd used, and I asked if they would join as founding clients at a reduced rate in exchange for testimonials and referrals. Two of them agreed before I finished the sentence. I named the company Northlight Marketing. A North Star guides you in the dark. I had spent 6 years navigating by someone else's light. This one was mine. I filed the incorporation paperwork in December, signed my first official contracts in January. By March, I had 4 clients. By June, I had 8. By the end of the first full year, I had 14 active accounts and was making more in a single month than I had ever made in a full calendar year at any previous job. I know that sounds fast. It was not fast. It was 16-hour days, client calls before sunrise, proposals written at midnight, weekends that ceased to exist as a concept, pitching to strangers who had no reason to trust me and convincing them to anyway, one honest conversation at a time. It was the hardest sustained effort of my entire life, and it was the most completely, genuinely alive I had felt in as long as I could remember. 8 months into building Northlight, Maya told me Daniel was engaged. Her name was Courtney. The timeline, once I did the quiet math, answered the question Daniel had answered with no when I asked him directly. I gave myself 2 days with the feelings that produced. Real feelings, ugly in the specific way feelings about being deceived always are. I cried once, honestly, and then I made a choice. I was not going to spend the next 2 years monitoring someone else's happiness. I had work to do. What I found out later, through various people tangentially connected to both families, was that Linda's experience with Courtney was not going according to her design. Courtney was not quiet. Courtney did not defer. Courtney drew hard lines around her home and her time and held them with a directness that apparently left Linda with very limited tools. The specific image of Linda standing in Courtney's kitchen being told firmly that she had not been invited is one I have returned to more than once on difficult days. For comfort, I am not going to pretend otherwise. Year 2 of Northlight was when the scale of everything changed. I had brought on 2 full-time employees, Priya, a junior strategist who was frankly more talented than someone with her level of experience had any right to be, and Tom, a creative director whose visual instincts were the kind that cannot be taught. With the 2 of them, I started taking on larger clients, a regional healthcare group, a national restaurant chain expanding into the Southeast, real accounts with real budgets and real expectations. Then, in the fall of that year, a firm called Meridian Capital reached out. Private equity, building a portfolio of high-growth service companies in the Southeast. They had been watching Northlight's numbers for 6 months. They wanted to talk about partnership or acquisition. I spent 2 weeks reviewing their proposal with my attorney and financial advisor. I asked more questions than they probably expected. I pushed back hard on terms that didn't protect my team. In the end, we negotiated a deal: equity investment, operating capital, acquisition resources that valued Northlight at a number that made me put the phone face down on my desk and stare at the ceiling and breathe for a full, silent minute. As part of the Meridian expansion, Northlight would absorb 2 Charlotte area marketing firms. We would grow from 3 employees to 22 within 18 months. We would move into new headquarters in Uptown Charlotte, floor-to-ceiling windows, a conference room with the company name on the wall, a kitchen organized exactly the way I decided to organize it. The headquarters opening event was planned for a Friday evening in October. I did not invite Linda Harlow, but Linda Harlow came anyway. I found out later she had seen the announcement in the Charlotte Business Journal. A contact forwarded it with a photo, a good one, honestly. The kind that shows you as the person you always hoped you would eventually grow into. The event started at 6. By 7, the space was full and warm and alive, with the particular energy of something real standing solidly in the world. Priya was laughing with a client near the bar. Tom was walking someone from the press through a campaign board. My attorney Marcus found my eyes from across the room and gave me a single nod that said everything. I was near the entrance, deep in conversation, when I felt the shift. Not a sound. just a change in the room's atmosphere, the specific pressure change that arrives before something does. I turned. Linda Harlow was standing at the entrance. Dark blazer, practiced composure, eyes already fixed on me before I had found her. She walked across the room directly toward me. She did not look at anything in the room. Not the art on the walls, not the logo behind the bar, not the 22 names on the staff board near the door. Only at me the whole way across, until she stopped 4 feet away. There were people nearby, enough to hear, which I am completely certain was intentional. She said it clearly, calmly, and with the particular weight of someone releasing a sentence they have been holding for a long time. Leaving you was the best decision my son ever made. The room quieted in our immediate area. I felt Priya go still to my left. I was aware of Marcus beginning to cross the room toward us. And I felt nothing like what Linda expected. Not shame, not the contraction of 6 years of being made small in my own life. Not the reflex to smooth it over or make her comfortable at my own expense. What I felt, standing in the building I had built from a promise made on a kitchen floor, was something so steady it almost surprised me. I held her gaze until she blinked, and then I said, quietly and without any performance at all, "I know you believe that, Linda. Give me 5 minutes." I stepped away before she could respond. I walked to the podium in the center of the room. I caught the eye of our event coordinator, Diane, who read the room in approximately 2 seconds and brought the space to gentle attention 7 minutes ahead of schedule. I stood at the podium and looked at the room, at Priya and Tom and every person who had shown up for something that had not yet proven itself, when showing up required actual faith. I gave my remarks. I talked about what Northlight had started as 1 woman, 1 laptop, 2 clients, and a promise that she would not let the people who underestimated her write the end of her story. I talked about what it cost to build something from nothing, the real currency, which is not money but time and sleep and the specific human terror of failing in public after you have already been seen falling in private. I talked about my team by name. I meant every word of it. And then I made the acquisition announcement. Northlight, as part of the Meridian Capital expansion, had finalized the absorption of 2 Charlotte area firms that week. Both companies would operate under the Northlight structure. All staff retained, all client relationships honored and elevated with additional resources. I read both names clearly. The second name was Harlow Brand Solutions. The marketing company Daniel had launched 18 months earlier after leaving his corporate position. The company that had grown fast and then stalled. The company that had 3 weeks prior accepted an acquisition offer from a Meridian portfolio firm that I had specifically identified, specifically lobbied for, and specifically ensured would be the company making the offer. Daniel Harlow now worked for Northlight. Daniel Harlow worked for me. The room absorbed this in the way rooms absorb things that are simultaneously professional and very, very personal. A moment of complete stillness, then a quiet wave of understanding, then genuine, warm applause. I stepped down from the podium. I walked back toward Linda. She had not moved, but her face had, not dramatically. Linda Harlow was not a woman who came apart in public, but the controlled, superior, I have already decided how this ends expression was entirely gone. In its place was something I had genuinely never seen on her face in 7 years. It looked like the beginning of understanding. I stopped in front of her, voice low, steady, nothing prepared, nothing performed. "Linda, I want you to hear this because I am only going to say it once." She was quiet. That alone told me where we were. "For 6 years you told me with every single thing you did and said that I wasn't enough for your family. That my work was a hobby, that I was a problem to be managed rather than a person worth knowing. You made me feel small inside my own marriage, in my own home, in my own life. And for a long time, far too long, I believed you." I paused. "I don't believe you anymore." She opened her mouth, closed it. Daniel working for me was not revenge. It was a business decision and a sound one. His team is talented and we're going to take good care of them. But I need you to understand something. This was never really about Daniel. and it was never really about you. It was about me remembering who I was before I walked into your family and started apologizing for taking up space in it. She said, in a voice quieter than I had ever heard from her. I didn't think, I just assumed. I know exactly what you assumed, I said. You assumed leaving was the end of my story. It wasn't. It was the first line of the real one. I excused myself. I went back to my event. I poured a glass of champagne. I clinked it against the glasses of Marcus and Priya and Tom and every person in that room who had helped me build something worth celebrating. I did not look back at the entrance. I heard later, through Maya, that Linda's relationship with Daniel and Courtney had become genuinely complicated in the months following that evening. Courtney had been navigating the same patterns I once navigated: the calls, the appearances, the reorganizing of things that were not hers. The difference was that Courtney drew lines immediately and did not apologize for them. Daniel started holding those lines too. I don't know the full picture, and I don't need to. That family is not my story anymore. My story. Northlight now has 31 employees, clients in 9 states. I was named to the Charlotte Business Journal's Women to Watch list this past spring, a thing that I still find slightly surreal when I say it. I moved into a house earlier this year. Mine. Chosen by me. Decorated by me. With a kitchen organized in a way that makes perfect sense to exactly the one person who lives in it. Last month, I reached out to Robert Harlow, Daniel's father, the gentle, quiet man who had shaken my hand at that first dinner and told me within 5 minutes that I had a wonderful laugh. He and Linda had separated about 9 months earlier. No drama, no public unraveling, just Robert quietly stepping into a smaller life that apparently suited him far better. We met for coffee. We talked for 2 hours. He apologized without being asked to, genuinely, fully, with no conditions attached. I saw what was happening, he said, many times. I told myself it wasn't my place to intervene. But the truth is, I was afraid of her too, in my own way. And that is something I am going to have to live with. I forgave you a long time ago, I told him, and I meant it completely. Here is what I think about when I sit with all of it now. The version of me who walked into that marriage at 23 was not weak. She was young and trusting, and she had found someone who felt like safety, and she had not yet learned to distinguish between the safety of being truly loved and the exhaustion of always needing to earn it. What Linda did across those 6 years, the erosion, the chipping, the patient, relentless campaign to shrink me to a size that didn't threaten her hold on her son. It worked. For a long time it worked. She made me smaller, quieter, more careful, less certain of my own right to be fully present in my own life. But here is what I understand now, on the other side of it. Being eroded by someone who fundamentally underestimates you is one of the most dangerous miscalculations they can make. Because if you survive it, if you have even one person who tells you the truth, even one quiet night where you sit with the gap between who you actually are and who you have been allowed to be, and let yourself feel how completely wrong that gap is, what grows out of that is not destruction. It is the most precise, most purposeful, most entirely yours fuel you will ever have access to. I did not set out to acquire Daniel's company for the sake of revenge. I set out to build something real. The acquisition was a sound business decision, and Daniel's team deserved the resources we brought to them. The connection to my past was just the universe doing what it occasionally, impossibly does, placing the right thing in front of you at exactly the right moment and trusting you to recognize it. When Linda walked into my building and said those words, and I need you to hear the full sentence, because this is the part worth staying for, she said, leaving you is the best decision my son ever made. She meant those words as a wound. She had polished them for 2 years. She had waited for exactly the right moment to use them in exactly the right room. What she did not know was that she had handed me the most satisfying sentence I have ever had the privilege of finishing. Leaving me was the beginning of the best years of my life. Every sleepless night after the divorce, every client call before sunrise, every pitch to a stranger who had no reason to say yes, every name on the staff board in that lobby. Every moment I sat alone in a quiet apartment that belonged entirely to me and felt the terrifying, wide open weight of having no one's permission to need. All of it, every last piece of it, came from the woman who got up off a kitchen floor and decided that this was not the end of her story. I am Jessica Harlow. I am 34 years old. I employ 31 people, I have clients in 9 states, and I have a kitchen organized exactly the way I like it. And I am only just getting started. If any part of this story felt like something you've lived, if you have ever had someone in your life who made it their project to convince you that you were the problem, I want to hear from you in the comments below. Tell me where you are in your story right now. Are you in the quiet erosion part, the kitchen floor part, the rebuilding part? Are you still in the middle of it, holding on and not yet able to see what's on the other side? Or are you standing at your own podium, making your own announcement, watching someone realize they miscalculated you? Wherever you are, I promise you, the building phase comes. It comes slowly and then all at once, and it is bigger and better and more fully yours than anything they ever let you believe you deserved. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to all of it. Stay calm, stay dignified, and let the ending write itself. There was one specific incident in year 5 that I have never told anyone about. Not Maya, not Marcus, not anyone, because for a long time it was too embarrassing to say out loud. And I think embarrassment like that is worth naming, because the embarrassment itself is part of how it works on you. Daniel's firm had a company gala, an annual thing, clients, partners, spouses, a nice venue downtown. The kind of event where you get dressed up and make careful small talk with people whose names you will not remember in the morning. I had been looking forward to it. I had bought a dress. A real one, not something I pulled from the back of my closet, but something I went out and found deliberately. Something that made me feel like myself in the full version, the unedited version. Navy blue, simple, well-fitted. I felt good in it. I stood in front of the mirror before we left and thought, this is the person I am when I am not afraid. We arrived and Linda was already there. She had been invited by Daniel, also without telling me, also simply as a fact I was expected to absorb without comment, and she was standing with a group of Daniel's colleagues when we walked in. She looked at me. She looked at the dress. She smiled. Then she turned to the woman standing next to her, a colleague's wife I had met once before, and said, loudly enough for me and the 2 people between us to hear, "Don't you think navy is such a difficult color to wear? It takes a very specific kind of woman to carry it." She did not say I was not that woman. She didn't have to. The colleague's wife looked at me with the polite, helpless expression of someone who has just witnessed something unkind and doesn't know what to do with what they saw. I smiled. I said hello. I got a drink and I stayed at that gala for 3 hours, and I did not let a single person see what that sentence had done to me. In the car on the way home, Daniel said, "Did you have fun? You seemed a little quiet." I looked out the window at the city moving past and I said, I was just tired, always just tired. I wore the dress again, by myself, the morning I signed Northlight's first major contract. I stood at my kitchen table in it and signed my name, and then I stood at the window with a cup of coffee and I thought about that gala. And I thought she was wrong about the dress too. The week before the event, I found out through the acquisition due diligence process exactly what the state of Harlow Brand Solutions was financially. I want to be clear, I am not going to gloat over someone's business struggling. That is not the person I am, and it is not what this story is about. What I will say is this. The numbers told a story about what happens when a company is built on the assumption that the founder's name is enough to carry it, without the internal infrastructure to support real growth. Daniel was talented. He had always been talented. But he had spent 6 years in a marriage watching someone build things on her own. And I genuinely think, he had been too close to that to see what it actually required. The late nights, the impossible clients, the 3 months of consecutive cash flow anxiety before the contract that saves everything finally arrives. He had been home for the easy dinners of all of that. He had not been there for the building. The acquisition was fair. His team, 4 people, genuinely good at their work, would have better resources and better stability under Northlight's structure. That was true, and I meant it, and I stood behind it. But I would be lying if I said that sitting across the conference table from Daniel's attorney during the final acquisition meeting and watching the paperwork move from their side to ours didn't feel like something. It felt like closure in the most complete sense of the word I have ever experienced. Not triumph, not revenge. Just the quiet, final arrival at the place where you understand it was always going to be okay. The version of me who didn't know that yet deserved more grace than I gave her at the time. But she was always going to find her way here. I signed the papers. I shook the hands. I drove home and made myself dinner and sat at my kitchen table in the quiet house that was entirely mine, and I let myself feel the full weight and the full lightness of it all at once. The next day, I called the florist for the event. The day after that, Linda saw the announcement in the journal. And 5 days after that, she walked into my building to deliver the sentence she had been saving since the divorce was finalized. I have thought about what she expected to happen in that moment. I think she expected one of 2 things. Either I would crumble publicly, which would confirm everything she had ever believed about me, or I would create a scene which would embarrass Daniel and confirm the other thing she had always believed, that I was difficult, unstable, not worth what he had invested. What she had not prepared for was calm. She had never, in 7 years, seen me be truly, unshakably calm. She had seen me manage myself. She had seen me perform steadiness while something else was happening underneath. That is different from the real thing, and I think on some level she always knew the difference. What she met in that lobby was not a performance. It was a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose and everything already won. I want to say one last thing before we go. A lot of people, when they hear a story like this, focus in the ending, the acquisition, the announcement, the look on Linda's face. And I understand that. I really do. We are wired for justice, and we feel it deeply when it arrives, especially for the people who were wronged quietly over a long time in ways that are hard to explain to someone who wasn't there. But the part of this story that I want you to carry with you is not the ending. It is the Tuesday in October when I opened my laptop at the kitchen table in a tiny apartment that smelled like candles I had bought only for myself, and I typed the first line of a business plan with no certainty that anyone would ever care about it. It is Priya on her first day looking